Hey guys, so you can find a lot of information out here about radios and how CB's better, ham sucks, no GMRS is a thing, no that sucks, ham's the only way to go and the rest of you guys all suck. I mean, opinions are like assholes, everybody's got one, including me. So one thing I see is you have people who want some communications but they don't want to take a ham radio test and get a technician license, which is fairly easy, and they don't want to get a VHF or 2-meter ham radio, anything like that. That might cost $200 or $300. They're just not interested. They don't want that. They want something cheap, and that's what they want. So we'll start with CB. Everybody knows what a CB is. They've been around, forever. This is an old Radio Shack Realistic TRC 432. Been around probably as long as I've been around anyway. This is a standard 40 channel. That's how old it is. Some of the display's not working, but the radio itself works. Standard 40 channels. It's AM only. This does not have sideband. Some radios do have sideband, which is another beast in itself. Has its benefits. So you went and you found yourself a CB, bought it new, found it in the garage, grandpa had it, whatever. You got it. So, you and your friends, you and your family, you're gonna rig them up across town. That's what you're gonna use. Well, we need an antenna, obviously. So, we got an antenna. We found the antenna, that's cool. Got a magnet on it. You can stick it on a car or whatever. Got a plug. It's going to screw in. There we go. We're all screwed in. Hey, cool. Now we get a CB that works. Throw that thing up. Now we can talk to people. Well, not so fast. I have seen this. That's why I'm doing this video. This antenna, just because it screws into that radio, does not mean it's going to work with that radio. And I'm going to show you why. So I have that antenna stuck to a good sized chunk of metal here behind me. So let's see what it's looking like on the other end. This is called an antenna analyzer. So I can hook it up to about any antenna between 1.8 through 500 megahertz. I don't do anything above that, so this does everything that I do. And I can see what's going on with the antenna. I can see what my SWR is, which is standing wave ratio. That in itself is really nothing. All the SWR is a comparison of forward power versus reflected power. So when this radio transmits at legal power on AM, it's transmitting 4 watts. That's called forward power. So that goes out your cable up to your antenna and off into free space out into the air. If your antenna isn't tuned correctly, you're going to get reflected power coming back down your line and into your radio. So a common SWR number to shoot for is 1.5 to 1 or less. That's really good. 2 to 1 is acceptable. You can get away with it. On CB, it really sucks because you're losing more power. So let's see what we got going with this antenna that we found up in Grandpa's barn or whatever, and we're gonna try and use on this CB. So we're at 27.213 megahertz. See if we can get right about 205-ish. This thing's kind of sensitive. And Kinda. So basically right now we're sitting between channel 19 and channel 20. And here's what we're looking at. The SWR, right there, we have nothing showing. If we look up at our needles, here's what we're looking at. Over here you got 1, 1.2, 3, 4, 5, 1.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 5, 6, and holy crap. Well, the SWR is way above the holy crap. So if you try to transmit with this antenna on a CB, you could have a couple things happen. Number one, you're not going to get any power out of it because it's all going to be reflected right back down into your radio. And after time, you're going to smoke your power amplifier in there. So, like I said, I've seen this. I've seen people try to use CB antennas on VHF marine boat radios because, oh, well, hey, you know, it screws in and it's a big antenna, so it's going to work better. Nope, doesn't mean a friggin' thing. So this antenna that we're connected to now is actually made for the 2 meter and 220 and 440 ham bands. So if we went up to those bands, you see needles doing all kinds of weird stuff there as our frequencies are going up. Hey, look, stuff's coming down. 148. That's the top of the 2 meter band. Yeah, look at that. We're in the middle of the 2 meter band. Where's the SWR? We can see it here now. It's 2.0. Needle's a little off. Yeah, sure, it's 2.0, but you know, it's not on the greatest ground plane here. It's just stuck to. I used to have a gunshot. Get rid of some crap. You know, it's stuck to a piece of metal. It's not the greatest ground plane. There's a little bit of crap around it here. But if I stick this on a hood of a vehicle or something with a wider, flatter metallic surface, that SWR will come right down. I know we're talking specifically CB in this video, but I'm just going to show you how this antenna's working. I haven't moved it, same spot. We're now going up. We're in the 220 ham band right now. 1.1, look at that. 50 ohms, that's like almost, that's perfect, man. Let's go up to 440. So we're all wonky here because on this analyzer to get to UHF, you need to come off this port. Go on this port. Look at that. See what's happening? Get it screwed on. So we're coming up into the 440 ham band. What's our SWRs looking like? 1.7. Getting a little bit less the higher we go. 1.5. The reason being is because that's what this antenna is designed to do. That's what this antenna is tuned to do. It's not tuned to go way down to 27 megahertz. So while you're scrounging around to find some cheap stuff to put on the air, you come up with some antennas. The shiny one on the right is the 102-inch whip, which actually is a CB antenna. The one in the middle, well, it's almost as big. The one to the left, well, almost as big. You can walk back. I unscrew this, this will be the same fitting as these two. 3/8 by 24. So, using the wrong antennas for the wrong stuff. Well, this is a big antenna, looks like a CB antenna, we'll use it. Yeah, it screws in. Oh yeah, this is gonna make a real good CB antenna. Hell yeah, that's a big ass antenna there. That'll work good, that's a big antenna. Well, let's see what it looks like. Well, that big CB antenna, that black one, here's what it's looking like. Wow, we're way up above the holy crap zone again. Yeah, we're in the middle of the band. Can't even read the SWR because it's so friggin' high. You know, what's the deal with that? It's a big antenna, it should work. Well, no, it ain't. It's not even close to a CB antenna. This is actually called a hamstick. Yeah, it's got the same mount, same threads, kind of almost as long, but it's got all these windings in it, which as we get up it, the windings get tighter. And eventually we get up to where it transitions to the whip. This antenna is actually made for the 20-meter ham band down at 14 megahertz. No way this thing is going to work at 27 megahertz. Just because it screws together, just because it looks big, just because it's an antenna, doesn't mean it's got to work. You got to know a little bit about what you're doing. So I've rigged up a real CB antenna. It's a 102-inch whip. It's a real good antenna. You see them hanging off a lot of off-road vehicles. We're back sitting on about channel 20. SWR is 4.3. So we can go to channel 20. Got a little bit of a signal there. That's just coming from this analyzer. This really doesn't put out any power. Just enough to be able to measure the antenna's reflective properties and tell you what's going on. So let's see if we can figure out a little bit of why this SWR is high. This is how fussy CB antennas are. So you can go buy a brand new one at the store, put it together, throw it on your car and head down the road. You can't hear nothing, you can't talk to nobody. Well, this is why. SWR. And you might get a good tuned antenna of down to like 1.2 to 1, but other people might not. So unless everybody has good tuned antennas and knows what they're doing, you have very inefficient communication. So the coax now is just running out across the deck here. I've got a piece of angled aluminum clamped to a car lift. This is how it would go through the bumper of the vehicle. That would tighten down just a little bit more. Oh, that's loose. Yeah, I wonder if that's changed anything. If we go back over to our analyzer. No, not really. And here's another thing that happens. And the reason we're doing this with an analyzer is so we don't have to actually put the RF juice to the antenna and risk damaging the radio. Wait a minute, now we're at 5.5. what do? Now we're at 6.3. Well, what's going on here? You know, getting right up through the roof here. Well, what's happened is here I am, big fat belly, have gotten closer to the antenna. That affects it. So as we back away from the antenna, you can see this drop. Look at that. I'm not changing anything. We're still at 27.206, which is basically channel 20. 205 is channel 20. See if I can get a little bit further away here. See how the difference is just from walking near an antenna? That'll affect it also. Now here's another thing we're gonna do. Right now it's about 2 feet off the floor. Let's just lower this arm down a little bit and see what happens. Okay, the antenna is about half the distance off the floor than it was before. We're now about 12 inches off the floor. This is just a cement floor with rebar underneath it. So, what's the rebar telling you? Counterpoise, ground plane. Just like sticking the antenna on a metal roof. The metal in the floor that you can't see is in the concrete is affecting this antenna. So let's see what we have for an SWR now. I haven't touched the meter. It drifts just a little bit. We're still at 27.203, close enough. Holy crap, look at that, 1.9. All because we dropped it a little bit down closer to the floor near that rebar and that ground plane. We could go in the air with this. This would work. Not real great. You're going to have some reflected power, especially with only 4 watts forward going out of your radio, but you could get on the air with 1.9. Well, let's put the thing right down on the floor and see what we get. Now we have 2.1. The only thing that has changed is now the antenna is almost right on the floor. So by getting closer to that ground plane, the SWR has gone up, which means we're going to have more power coming back down our line from the antenna, going this way, boom, hitting back into your radio. You don't need to go out and buy one of these, but you should at least have an SWR meter. You don't need to get one like this. It's HF 144, 440, stuff like that if all you're going to do is play with CBs. You just need one that will cover the CB band. And those are pretty cheap, probably 25, 30 bucks, 40 bucks, something like that. The only downfall to doing it with this meter is you have to connect this meter to the radio and the antenna to the meter and actually put the RF juice from the radio through it. So every time you transmit, you're getting that reflected power back down to your radio while you're trying to figure out what's going on with the antenna. With this, we don't have to do that. So I've hooked up the SWR meter. Out of the radio, into the meter, out of the meter, over to the antenna. So let's see what we have on that. This is a 25-year-old meter. Yeah, we're showing about a 1.8 SWR. So on this we can actually see forward watts and reflected watts. If this thing's accurate. Bangs going to stabilize myself. Now this says like 7 watts, which I don't believe, and reflecting about 3 watts. So if that's accurate, that means the radio is transmitting 7 and the antenna is reflecting 3, so you're getting 4 watts out of the antenna. And that's sitting about 4 to 5 watts, showing a good 1 watt reflected. That's a little more believable right there. On just on a different setting here. I just went to a higher power setting on the meter. So we'll go with that one. So 4 watts produced by the radio. That 1.8 SWR is kicking back 1 watt. So you're only getting 3 out of the antenna. 1 watt of loss doesn't sound like much, but on a CB, on AM, it is. So like I said, SWR in itself isn't anything. You can see the lines on here that are red with that SWR thing down there. All that is just a reference. It's a name. So if somebody says, yeah, I got a high SWR, or your SWR should be below 2.0 or below 1.5. It's just a reference point. And it's just a comparison between the forward, so like this, the comparison of 4 watts forward and 1 watt reflected. So if the SWR was higher, which will make that happen, you're going to see more reflected power. So let's jack this antenna up and get that SWR up. Just see what happens. Okay, so the whole point of this video is you can't just hook an antenna up to a radio and think you're good to go. The antenna's back up about 2 feet off the floor. I haven't touched it, nothing else has changed. The only thing that's changed is another foot of elevation above the rebar. Still on 20, right in the middle of the band. Now let's see what we got going. Holy crap, 5.0. That ain't good. I ain't gonna key that up much. So that's showing like 4 or 5 watts out. I'm gonna say 4 because it's just under the tick there. And like what? If we look over here on the reflected side, a good solid 3 watts reflected. So what that means is if you haven't figured it out by now, you've got 4 watts going out of the radio. You've got 3 watts reflected. You're getting 1 watt out of your antenna. The rest is coming right back into your radio. And that little bit changed it. So, like I said, if you want to get some comms going with your friends, with your buddies, your family, that's not relying on cell phones, and you want to use CB for, just a few miles, because you don't want to bother with ham radio, that's your choice. I'm not going to ding you on it. It's a way to communicate. It works. I would recommend getting sideband radios because you can get 12 watts of power on sideband. Learn how to use those. But if all you can come up with is some cheap old AM rigs, hey, they will work. They'll get the job done for a few miles. But you need to learn a little bit about antennas. You don't need to be all technical. You don't need to get into the mumbo jumbo. That's something I was trying to do in this video, was take the mumbo jumbo out of it, try and make it a little simpler for folks. And on CB, because of the wavelength, we're down at 11 meters. the antennas aren't really forgiving, as you can see. That little bit of movement has screwed up your SWR that much, and that'll make a difference. Yeah, with a good SWR, maybe you'll get 4 or 5 miles. With the SWR you just saw, you might get 1/4 of a mile. That's why. Wrapping it up, you want to make sure you have good coax, good connectors, good connections. If you don't, that'll screw things up too. This coax is RG58. It's pretty small. It's only like not even 1/4 of an inch. The piece running over to the antenna, it's the same thing. This is just some short jumper stuff that I use for testing out. Where's the antenna? There it is. I use for testing out stuff like this. This connector, I'll show you, is starting to get bad. Get braid showing, things are starting to loosen up. About time to get rid of this and build a new one. So depending on how long your run is, on a CB, I mean, you're running 20 feet up onto your roof, 30 feet, you can get away with RG58. It'll work. It's cheap. It'll work. But you'd always be better off to have some higher quality stuff, like RG8, 213, LMR 400, something like that. This is LMR 400, no connectors on it. I put on all my own connectors. The last I knew, this stuff was about $1 a foot. It's probably up now because of COVID. But there's going to be less loss in this cable than in that cable. I'll hold them side by side. You can see the difference in the sizes. So in coax cable, you have what's called loss. The higher the frequency, the worse it gets over distance. Down at 27 megahertz, I haven't done the math, so I'll just throw out some numbers. But let's say on a piece of this cheap RG58, you know, because, oh geez, I don't want to spend 50 cents a foot because I'm a real cheapskate. Well, maybe over 20 feet you've lost, we'll say 1/2 a dB. We'll just call it 1/2 a dB. So you've lost some of your 4 watts that's supposed to be going out your antenna right there. It just ain't getting there. Not to mention your SWR. So over the same distance, this cable here might be rated, you might only lose 0.1 dB in the exact same setup. So your power, you're going to get more power, more signal to your antenna. It's going to work better. It's more efficient. Yeah, it costs a little more, but it works better. So that's kind of, like I said, I haven't done the math, I haven't spec'd it out, I'm just throwing out some numbers. A lot of folks I run into on YouTube or whatever, they want cheap. Oh, the cheapest thing, I want the cheapest radio, the cheapest coax, cheapest antenna, the cheapest whatever. Don't cheap yourself to death, guys. You know, spend a little extra, a few cents more, maybe a couple dollars more, maybe $10 more, and get something that's going to work and work good. Is it worth it? Or is it like in my refrigerator video where I mentioned, oh, we think we know what we're doing, so now we've just bought 3 refrigerators and hauled 3 refrigerators by boat out to an island because we had no idea what we were doing. So buy once, cry once. That's a good principle. The general rule of thumb, once your antenna is mounted up on your roof, on a pole, on your vehicle, wherever you've done it, and you know you've got a good ground plane, you have good connections, You know all that's good, and you check your SWR. If it's higher on the upper end of the band, shorten the antenna. So a little bit ago I said CB antennas aren't really forgiving due to the wavelength. So right now we're in the middle of the band. So if we go up to channel 40, then we go roll over to 1. So if the SWR is higher on channel 40 than it is down at 20 and down on channel 1, you need to shorten the antenna. If the SWR is higher down on channel 1, 2, or whatever, down on the bottom of the band, than it is at the top of the band, you need to lengthen your antenna. With a little bit of tweaking of the elevation, we're down to 1.5, right in the middle of the band. That's pretty good. So I was mentioning a second ago about if your SWR is higher on the upper end, shorten the antenna. If it's higher on the lower end, lengthen the antenna. The CB band spans between these frequencies. I did it backwards because of how you do math. It's easier to subtract going this way. So channel 40 is 27.405. Channel 1, 26.965. If you subtract all that, the entire bandwidth is only 0.44 megahertz. So it's not even half of 1 megahertz wide. So in that little itty bitty bandwidth, we can have some wide fluctuations of SWR. Again, going back to the wavelength, that's what causes it. When we get into some ham stuff with shorter wavelengths, like up on 2 meters, 440, 220, it's a lot more forgiving. We're spreading out 4 megahertz, 10 megahertz, 15, 20 megahertz, and the SWRs will stay where they should be over a lot wider bandwidth because of the shorter wavelength. Some of the ham bands below these numbers are even worse because we have a lot wider bandwidth, like down on 20 meters, 40 meters, stuff like that. We're down at 14 megahertz, 7 megahertz, 3 megahertz, 1.8 megahertz. The bandwidth is a lot wider, the wavelength is a lot longer. We'll get into that in a different video. I just want to demonstrate what you can see in this little itty bitty narrow margin. We'll turn our meter back on. So at channel 20, roughly, so we're 1.5. So let's go down to channel 1. So we need to get down to 26.965. Can't quite get there that way. We can do it this way. It's pretty close. There is the bottom of the CB band. 1.7. Now let's go up to the top of it. We need to get to 27.405. See if we can hit it. Oh yeah, we'll hit it. 27.405. Close enough, right there. Alright, this is good all the way across the band, it looks like. 1.5 up here also. You'll see it change just as I touch. See the increase, 1.8. Let go, drop down to 1.5. That's how human effect can mess with stuff. So we'll just slowly cruise our way back down. See if anything weird happens. Nope. Looking pretty good. Okay, I came out to the truck and hooked up to this antenna because I know you can see more of a fluctuation on this one than we could on the one sitting on the garage floor. So down on channel 1, we've got 1.4. Now watch what's going to happen as we climb up. 1.0. That's like perfect. 27,205. We're at 1.0. See if I can get a little closer to it here. Close enough. 1.0, right in the middle of the band. Now we're going to climb up to the top of the band. Look how little we moved, but look how much the SWR has gone up. We're at the top of the band, 1.5. So in the middle we had 1.0. At the top we have 1.5. I don't remember what the bottom was now. Bottom's about 1.4. That is a sensitive adjustment knob, I'll tell you. So, in the truck, my worst SWR is in the upper part of the band, and it's 1.5. The very bottom is 1.4, right smack in the middle is 1.0. You can't get it any better than that. Now you're not going to be able to get 1.0 all the way across this band. If you can, good luck, and it's one hell of an antenna. But you can, the idea of filming this part in the truck was you could see the fluctuation in that little 0.44 megahertz bandwidth of how much the SWR can change just in the CB band. Okay, I probably bored you enough by now. Wrapping this up. The truck antenna is trim browning. It is through the roof. It's like a 3-foot long whip, something like that. Just a stainless steel whip. You saw how well it's tuned in the band. It works good. So, if you have any takeaways from this video, don't just grab an antenna, slap it together, and think you've got something that's going to work. You need to learn a little bit about it, learn how to tune your antenna, learn how to read an SWR meter, and you need to know that my numbers, I go with 1.5 or below. That's what I shoot for, to get the most power and most efficiency out of my antennas. If you can get it lower than that, it's great. But don't smoke your radios. If you're going to put the money and time into trying to have some communications, at least do it so it works.